Speaking of firmware, I want to pivot quickly to a new report out of our friends at Binarly. I actually met these guys at the Reverse conference in Orlando, Takahiro and Fabio, on a pretty deep technical report on their introduction of a new method for detecting UEFI bootkits, analyzing unique code behaviors. Costin, you got a read of the report. What is the big takeaway here? What is the
Um, well, I thought it was a very interesting report, and I think it's a kind of cooperation between multiple researchers. I
Yeah,
think
I
they
saw your
mentioned
boy Alexander
Alexander
Milenkowski. Got a
Milenkowski,
shout out,
correct?
yeah.
Yep.
Correct.
Brian Baskin and some of the ESET folks as well.
Correct. So I think ESET played an important role here because they ran the Yara rules that the team developed to find these new UEFI bootkits. I thought that this research it seemed very similar to the one that I did, I think, around 2018-19 when I was trying to find UEFI implants, not necessarily rootkits or bootkits, but just like generic UEFI implants. I think I presented about it a bit at SAS in Singapore, but also at Blue Hat in Israel. And I think that this is a fascinating field. More people could probably look into this
There's a
because there,
lot of stuff happening, right, that we just don't know about.
absolutely, there must be. And like again, just by looking at the various hints that dropped over the years, looking into those and left and right documents dropped by your favorite leaker or from your favorite three letters agency, you will see that the capabilities to target UFI existed for a very, very long time. And people actually, I've seen people put experience in developing UFI implants into their CVs. So I think that there probably deserves this deserves more attention. I thought it was super interesting. So I was like, going like, where's the Yara rules? Give me the Yara rules so I can run them on my collection. And I discovered that the Yara rules are not public. So
They didn't release the Yara rules.
I think not, or I
How
don't
does
know.
think
that
you
help
can
you?
ask them for it though. You can, like, in this
Can I ask them
particular
now?
case.
Can I
Yeah.
ask now? Can you guys share the Yara rules with me
Ask on
on
the
this?
podcast. They're listening.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean,
Russia, if you're listening.
I'd love
What does the
to
Yara rules
run
help you
them.
do?
I'd use them to hunt them on my repository of firmware images. I have a repository of images that I collected over the years from all sorts of different sources. So I did that for the research that I showed back in the days. I think I unpacked and parsed about 50,000 firmware images, looking for interesting things. And I'd love to see how these Yara rules can potentially find more stuff. I'd love to play with them.
And the paper is like you have to go beyond existing detection mechanisms using all kinds of different ruling, and the paper introduces discussed about advanced static analysis, semantic detection, ML-based clustering techniques, and it's like it's an introduction of new ways and new ideas for us to go hunting for these things. Juanito, is this something that interests your lab? Like when you guys think about UEFI-based bootkit, UEFI bootkits, and so on, is this top of mind for you to be able to detect these things?
Yeah, I mean, look, I personally think this is an area that's getting sort of like tragically under explored and under. It's
Invested
not.
just generally, yeah.
It's just not as big a concern as it should be, considering that this is one of like the main roots of trust that you're relying on for every other like security technology that comes on top, right? Like you're basically saying like this is the belief that the ground you set foot on when you get out of bed is solid, right? Like that is it's just like some foundational root of trust that you need. And of course, some of the higher end folks from some of the three-letter agencies have been so of course they've been invested into UEFI and into like, because what a wonderful way to have persistence beyond even like reinstalling the OS, to be able to get in from under any security solution no matter what without necessarily being detected. And that's just the kind of technology that requires a certain level of specialization that I would put beyond your average nation state attacker, but that is worth the investment for a truly high end attacker to say, oh, like the gains are so fucking massive. We're going to persist on these systems forever. We are going to be able to like undercut any security solution. And coming from a security solution maintainer, it's something that you're concerned about at all times. The same, there's a reason rootkits and bootkits were always the thing that you worried about, because it was at that point it was a fight like for altitude. Who has the greatest altitude in the operating system, such that you can trust that the AV or the EDR or the XDR or whatever the fuck you want to call it is the thing that has the greatest visibility, and is not under the shadow of a rootkit or a bootkit that is feeding it misinformation or that can shut it down. That's the biggest problem for us, right? Like for any EDR vendor, your biggest concern is something unhooking you, tampering with your detection, removing you, shutting you down, uninstalling you. And that is the biggest issue for anyone that, and honestly, it's why it's so fucking naive for people who want to create new security solutions. And they say, oh, we're going to build an agent. We're going to build a brand new agent. You're like, bro, you do not understand like how much work goes into just keeping this thing alive, stable, having it not intrude or fuck with people's normal workflows, not take up too much processing power, not be slow, still be compatible after Microsoft decides that like they switch to this new rolling update basis. Now like shit gets changed within Windows 10 and 11 like every 3 to 6 months in undocumented ways sometimes, and you still have to maintain this product that isn't shutting the computer down or fucking with people's work, but can't be shut down or fucked with by some other thing that suddenly has greater altitude. Again, that's why people were so pissed off about these Microsoft signed pieces of malware, Microsoft signed rootkits making a comeback because of the new shift in their signing mechanisms. But overall, this is like one of the unexplored areas that a lot of folks in the industry like to pretend is just not a factor. Like we basically put it as our version of out of scope, because considering it is such a headache and such a potentially catastrophic situation for detection that nobody wants to think about it.
And now we're relying on smaller third-party companies. Costin, why haven't more anti-malware vendors invested in doing these level of detections? Shout out to the ESET guys, because they're pretty prominent out front with some of these discoveries.
They've invested into it. Yeah.
I think it's a question also of return on investment. I mean, this is quite difficult to achieve in a reliable way, and I know because I've been pushing back at my old job for us to have this capability in our scanner, and implementing it in a reliable way, given how many different chipsets there are out there, like Intel, AMD motherboards, older Intel chipsets. So doing this in a way that works let's say on as many platforms as possible, and then it's stable and you don't crash the operating system is kind of a work of art, if you want. So I think one of the reasons this is not maybe more popular is because it's very difficult to implement, so it requires a huge initial investment, and then you run it for years and you don't find anything. And I think that one of the reasons that you don't find anything is because people don't know how these threats look like. So like all your heuristics, if you want, which are based on code emulation, like behavior blocking, even signatures, they don't work very well for malware that is designed to operate at that level. So you need to build different kind of heuristics, pretty much what they're talking about in this paper and what I was talking in my own research years ago. You need to develop a different class of heuristics looking for other kind of hints. And again, this is difficult because the amount of publicly available rootkits is just half a dozen. It's just a handful of bootkits, UEFI bootkits out there. and still people don't know how these look like. Every now and then, yes, ESAT or Kaspersky or others, they just find another one in the wild that was used by, I don't know, Ghost Emperor or like another APT group. But in general, these are quite rare. And honestly, I think that there has to be even more advanced things out there, such as
Oh, for
SMM
sure.
rootkits, like system management mode rootkits, which I think that people like the author of Black Energy was discussing, like the kind of things that Lisa was talking about in the past. These have to exist in the wild, and the problem is that your even your Ring Zero antivirus solution will not find them. It will not
Yeah.
be able to catch them. So it's still a question mark. How do you go about finding those things in the negative rings, -1, -2, and so on, like hypervisor rootkits and system management rootkits, or even other kind of hidden places.
One of the things they mentioned was that
Rootkits.
even Yara has a limitation, right? Like even the
Correct.
best possible use of Yara still is somewhat limited. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, in the sense that after all, Yara allows you to put kind of certain ideas into a semi-programming language designed to catch traditional malware, and this is what it is about. Like in hunting for UEFI rootkits, sometimes you need to take into account the fact that you're dealing with an ecosystem, like a collection of files. And Yara, by the way it was implemented, it works with one file or one block of data that it scans. But in some cases, you need to look across multiple files at the same time and like put them together and correlate them in order to say, yeah, this is what's happening here is suspicious, because there's like this strange bitmap file that potentially has a buffer overflow, which triggers some encrypted shellcode that you wouldn't otherwise get to unless you trigger the vulnerability into the bitmap. So this is what they mean by the fact that even Yara has limitations, and for this, it's almost like looking at an entire new computer or an entire new file system that you need to analyze as a whole, and every single like individual file from that file system alone by itself might not be sufficient to trigger your heuristics.
Right. So it's Yara plus some additional kind of custom rules creation and some like embedded
And
intellectual knowledge of
the
things.
context, yeah.
The context, right?
Yeah, I think the certain amount of like, so I think the limitations with Yara really come in just on virtue of most of the time Yara is being run on files on disk, maybe in memory, depending in what kind of context they're being deployed. Like I love like Joe Sandbox is something that I admire in large part because of implementations of things like this, where they're like, oh yeah, we'll run your Yara rules in memory while the thing is running. But even there, you're basically saying like we're either looking at a file as it is laid out on disk with its features discernible on disk, or as it's laid out in memory with its features in memory. But you're still not talking about the kind of like behavioral things that you can do when you hook into a system that understands what those code blocks are supposed to do, how they're following each other, what the control flow of the program is. Like there's still a way in which Yara, I'm not saying is stuck at the metadata level. It's one level past that, but it's still not an understanding of how that code plays itself out, self modifies, how it feeds into itself, how it recurses, how it flows in execution. And for something as specialized as UEFI, you like look, credit to Binarly, right? Like the reason the guys are doing this research at Binarly and they have firmware hunt and stuff is because Binarly has built a whole fucking platform to instrument how these things work and be able to like, and you have massive gains from that, because if you do understand it and you can process it that way, that means that you have a much easier time saying, well, this is the chain of logic that means that something bad is happening, and you can go and sort of process that elsewhere. But Yara is not going to be able to do that for you.
All right. So, what's the next steps? Folks just trying to advance this research, get some happy hunting going. Maybe the guys share some Yara rules so that additional people can go hunting. I saw them mention they found some variants of certain things with very poor detections on VT, which suggests that you can go hunting their stuff on VT, right, Costin?
I mean, yeah, I still think that nowadays, if you want to inspect your own computer, like the UEFI in your own computer, it's not a very straightforward process. Yeah, sure, you can essentially find all the open source free software to do that. You can find it on GitHub, but it's not kind of straightforward. I still think would be nice if somebody created a tool that you can just download, run it on your computer. It automatically dumps your firmware using, let's say, the APIs and support for multiple platforms. It offers to upload it to Firestone. It offers to upload it to our friends at Binarly. It offers to upload it to our friend Roger Thompson, who used to run a website to scan your firmware and so on and so on. So I still think there's a kind of high entry level. It's not straightforward to do that. And I mean, even keep in mind the fact that not everyone runs on just one operating system, Windows, whatever, but there's people out there with the Macs, with the Linux systems, and so
And the
on and so on.
complexities that come with fetching firmware
Yeah.
in all of those types of devices.
Exactly. It's super hard.
I think that area, at the risk of sounding like a little too executive-y, I think the big issue you have with the firmware space is a combination of like accessibility in the way that Kosin is describing, and a lack of appropriate awareness and prioritization, which is to say, from an expert standpoint, it is absolutely obvious that this is an extremely important area of our like security foundation, and that any threat that exists there unnoticed, not the fact that there are threats, but the fact that like we are not aware of the integrity and security of that space, such like, which is something that gets dismissed very quickly, right? Like whenever one of these UEFI bootkits shows up, like ESET finds a thing, someone like Dave Weston will come out and say, yeah, but that's from like an old version of like, that doesn't include a secure boot, that's from like an old thing. And I'm like, yeah, but they found it now and it's been around for 8 years and nobody noticed that it was there. So like, I don't give a fuck that there's a new piece of technology that means that wouldn't work in certain versions. I mind that there have been 50,000 computers that had this in it and none of us could tell because none of our tech is actually engineered in a way where it's checking for that integrity. But that really shows the bigger problem firmware has, and it's the uphill battle that Binarly has as a company that's a hard tech company trying to solve this problem, which is there is a weird self-reinforcing loop of ignorance in security products, which says this is going to take effort. Why should we invest the effort into solving this problem? And you go, well, because it's a big security problem that will undermine the security of everything else. And they go, well, but we haven't seen any of those threats. And you go, well, you haven't seen it because you haven't put the effort into seeing it.
Yeah.
And then you go, look, here's an example of a threat. And they go, yeah, but it's just one. And you go, yes, but but here's the example. And they go, maybe there were more. Customers haven't asked for this. And you go, because they don't know that they need this. And you go, it's a lot of effort. And it's like a weird little fucking ignorance loop. It's like a PM problem that it's constantly, right? Like, why would we prioritize this problem, et cetera? But I think what we need to see and what Binarly needs to solve in a way is finding that kind of friction, that way to lower the initial friction into getting more data and showing and creating more awareness more regularly, like tying into other things, tying into how the OSs work, tying into let's say these like bullshit appliances, like all these different ways, just finding some way to making it just a little smoother for information to come in and awareness to come out. Because right now you're in that early stage of awareness for a problem, kind of akin to when the antiviruses in the late 90s, early 2000s were still dealing with that narrative of like viruses aren't really real. Antivirus companies make viruses. They're creating a problem for which they're trying to sell a cure, but like who the fuck is actually dealing with computer viruses? And like now that sounds insane. It sounds completely batshit crazy. But that was a thing that was being argued well into like the mid 2000s, right? Like what was his name? Rob Rosenberg was like a big figure in that whole like, oh, you guys are just making this shit up. You're like, okay, thanks, bro. And like, look, that was a part of the evolution of our awareness of that problem. UEFI and memory threats and GPU threats are things that are still well within that realm of like, we know it's possible. We know we've seen examples of a lot of these things, not all of them, but a lot of them. We have seen documentation that tells us that the big boys have been playing in that space for a long time. And every once in a while we catch a glimpse of a thing, go, whoa, look at what's been out there. But then we all just go right back to business as usual and go, it's kind of out of scope. You go,
We go back
so
to Juniper.
yeah, rickety foundations, bro.
And the reality is that a world of hurt is happening on the there that nobody knows is capable of seeing, is looking for, and we're told that secure boot has solved it all when we get secure boot bypasses at every security conference anyway.